Hi, I'm Chris Walker, Head of Health and Safety at Napthens Health and Safety. Thanks for joining me again this month for what will hopefully be a slip, trip, and fall free walk through your workplace. The health and safety matter of focus this month is the management of that seemingly unimportant and often overseen hazard, the cause of so much pain, disruption, and alongside all of that, substantial cost to businesses of all types. Yep, we're talking about slips, trips, and falls. Now, of course, we've all done it, or at the very least, we will have seen it. We'll have slipped, tripped, or fallen at some point, and the consequences will undoubtedly have varied greatly from mild hilarity and minor embarrassment at the best, right through to serious physical harm and even, in the worst cases, life changing injuries. During the next couple of minutes, just want to take the opportunity to cover a few points of importance on the management of slips, trips, and falls within your businesses and your premises, aiming to serve you with a reminder that this is a real and often quite significant risk associated with your activities, one that needs you to take a close look at it and ensure that you're proactively managing. Now, as always, we'll highlight the key legal requirements around this particular hazard, discuss some of the key control measures and common issues, as well as considering the scale of the problem, instances of slipping, tripping, and falling caused to UK businesses. Now, for clarity, we're not considering the risks associated with falling from or working at height in this piece. It's something that we'll consider during a future session. We're talking here about slips, trips, and falls on the same level only. Now, it would be entirely out of character for me to start without a bit of a throwback to a health and safety incident from years gone by, something encountered during my many years in the business. In this case, I will have to, and will try and limit myself to just the one. Um, Firstly, I think it's important to remind everyone that slips, trips, and falls can happen to anyone at any time, however inconvenient that time is. And as mentioned earlier, those slips, trips, and falls can have wide ranging consequences. I want to start with what's now an almost legendary tale, certainly in my training sessions, of the regional HSE advisor who tripped over a torn carpet section during, and I promise this is not made up, a slips, trips, and falls audit of a premises that they were responsible for. Now, on this occasion, we and the regional HSE advisor were lucky. There were no consequences, no harm was caused, but a good, proper, thorough near miss investigation found that both a lack of maintenance, a lack of action when building defects were reported by staff, and a number of light bulbs, which had long since emitted their last flash of brilliance, all contributed to what didn't, but could have been, a nasty injury. Just as a quick aside, anyone who is now wondering what on earth a near miss is, will find a Napthens H&S podcast from earlier this year on the QCS website covering just that subject. Now, this particular incident also gave us a classic combination of immediate incident causes, taking both some unsafe conditions in the lack of adequate lighting and the presence of a flooring defect, and also an unsafe act or behaviour in the form of the HSE advisor paying more attention to that carefully crafted audit form in front of him rather than looking where he was going. Now, I must point out that the aforementioned HSE advisor was not in fact me, but while doing so, I must confess to having slipped or tripped down the stairs at home twice now in the last 20 years, each time breaking a bone, and each time because I was attempting to carry too much down the stairs at once. Lesson learned? Maybe. We shall see. I mention that because, as well as premises defects and flooring conditions, people, employees, those visiting your premises need to be reminded, believe it or not, to look where they're going. Safe arrangements need to be in place also to ensure that employees aren't forced in the course of their work to rush and to run around the premises or to take chances carrying excessive loads up and down stairs, for example. It's not just the premises, but the way the people interact with them that's important when we're thinking about slips, trips, and falls risk management. Now, slips, trips, and falls remain, based on the latest workplace accident statistics from the Health and Safety Executive, the leading type of workplace accidents which result in riddle reportable severity injuries to workers. 29% of those injured in workplace accidents which cause an injury serious enough to warrant notification to the Health and Safety Executive suffer that injury as a result of a slip, trip, or fall on the same level. And when you combine that with the fact that 65,000 plus injuries of this level of severity were reported, that's a serious number of employees slipping, tripping, falling, and suffering serious consequences. Of course, these injuries come with the potentially serious impact on the lives of those affected, as well as a serious impact on the employer, potentially their insurer if they're to be on the receiving end of a claim for compensation, and in certain circumstances, action by the enforcing authorities. Of specific importance in the care sector is the additional responsibility to consider the risk from slips, trips, and falls to those that they care for, and to consider the specific risk to those more likely to slip, trip, or fall, but also those particularly vulnerable to injuries and severe consequence as a result of any such incident. When you add visitors and contractors into the mix, who may well be unfamiliar with your premises, identifying slip, trip, and fall type hazards before somebody encounters them takes on an even greater importance. Now, overall, as an employer and operator of a business, we have plentiful legal duties. I'm referring specifically here to the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 and also the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. And these duties are to protect the health and safety of all of those who might be affected by our activities. Now, this, of course, includes ensuring that we have completed suitable and sufficient risk assessments and that we're working to reduce the risk of harm from reasonably foreseeable hazards as far as we reasonably practicably can. Of course, slip, trip, and fall hazards are often reasonably foreseeable. They need to be identified in risk assessments, and you need to be doing something to ensure they are suitably controlled. Now, furthermore, the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations 1992 make clear requirements of routes for pedestrian travel, including the requirement to avoid conditions which may give rise to the potential for a person to slip, trip, or fall. With these clear legal duties in mind, do you know that the risks from slips, trips, and falls are identified in your risk assessments? Are such risks considered in individual service user risk assessments? What measures have you put in place to control these risks at your premises? And when was the last time you checked that they were still working? How are you managing the maintenance, the cleaning programs, and the upkeep of your premises in order to ensure that everything reasonable is being done to prevent conditions arising which could create a slip, trip, or fall incident? You'll certainly need to be aware of some of the common risk areas and conditions. Of course, there are slippery floors and surfaces to manage, where surfaces are unintentionally, or in the case of cleaning, often intentionally, made wet by water or other fluids and substances. You need to consider whether the flooring that you have down in those areas is of a suitable type, so that the risk can be mitigated when there is a potential for it to get wet. Have you got good arrangements in place for prompt action on spillage containment and cleanup? And do your cleaning schedules and processes minimise slip risks on clean, wet floors? Dry, dusty floors contaminated with powders present a risk, as do any obstructions in walkways, either those permanently fixed in place or those left lying around potentially due to poor housekeeping. Commonly, trailing cables, handbags, coats, and other items in and around offices and workstations need a close looking at, as do the arrangements for adequate lighting and reporting and replacement of failed lights and lamps. Changes in level, if not clearly marked or indicated, as well as any uneven surfaces, need to be identified and steps taken to reduce the risk. As we're moving into the warmer months now, hopefully the risks from adverse weather conditions aren't as high on your radar, but safe arrangements for car parks, snow and ice clearance, and suitable entrance mats, which don't in themselves create a trip hazard, are well worth getting in order in good time. It always pays to be prepared. That concludes the Slips, Trips and Falls session. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to the recording and look forward to discussing further key health and safety topics with you in the coming months. Thank you and take care.